Why don't you take us back to
Bring it
when
back.
you were a little Liddy bro, Flacko, Dutch, Vega, whatever we were when you were like super young, and walk us through a little Bronx experience that you were having back in those days.
Yeah. Back then I was called Reinaldito. Reinaldito. Because
Hmm.
my real name is Ronaldo. My parents would call me Reinaldito. That's the thing that Latin people do. They
D-
add an ito to your name. You know what I mean? They add an ito or ita to your name. Oh, like you're Holden. It'll be Holdencito. Holdencito. Jamesito. You know what I mean? Danita. Danita. You know? So yeah, back then what was I actually think I did kind of answer, but I went deep into the fact that like it was hip hop for me. So like my parents were playing like a lot of Latin music. Like what Pro said in his interview resonated with me because it's the same situation for me, right? Where like I'm growing up, my mother's Nicaraguan, my father's Puerto Rican. So like people who know those two cultures would probably think that like my mother was into like ballads and maybe like mariachi type music, and that my father was into like maybe like salsa merengue type stuff because like that's heavy on the island of Puerto Rico. But like it was actually in reverse. And my father was into like boleros, which is like Latin Spanish ballads and love ballads. And like we were talking about with Pro, it's uh it's sexy sad music, you know. um at least that's how I interpreted it, and because that's how I felt about it. And so my father listened to a lot of that and a lot of like mariachi stuff and like my like Mexican stuff. And like my mother listened to like a lot of like Puerto Rican, island Caribbean, like new age stuff. So she liked, you know, everything new. So she loved Mark Anthony when he first came out. There was this dude named John Cicada when I was growing up that my mother loved. Um, uh, I forget who else, but like, you know, she was into like salsa merengue. Oh, I was digging my feet into the sand. I caught a little insect on my foot. This nigga was walking around at me like, oh shit, nigga, get off my foot.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so they were playing a lot of Latin music, but because I was growing up with an older brother who was 10 years older than me, he was kind of like indoctrinating me to everything cool, you know. So like he indoctrinated me to hip hop, he indoctrinated me to kung fu movies, he indoctrinated me to like ninja stars, and he had a BMX bike and a skateboard. And when my mom used to make me, make him take me with him where he would go, he would make me take his skateboard. He would jump on his BMX bike. I would follow behind him by at least a block, because he wouldn't like slow down for me. And so my brother like had me into like hip hop, like hip hop was really like what I was really, really into, like even as little, like whatever it was that was playing on the radio. But really, that's what it was. It was whatever was playing on the radio. So like we
Hmm.
had a lot of like hip hop, a lot of pop, a lot of been around the world, and I can't find my baby. I don't know when, I don't know why. Shit like that, fucking Gloria, 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 shit like that. That would play on the radio, and I loved all that shit. I still love all that shit, as you can tell by how enthusiastically I'll sing those songs.
That's
Um,
fresh.
yeah,
So I guess where we didn't really get into is more the stuff like where y'all bumping vinyls or tapes and all of that side of life is where
mm-hmm.
we really didn't delve into. So we did answer a little bit on
Facts.
that, but then like there's just so much more to it. Like we don't know if you were a drawer. We never even asked about any of that side of your life. So, Dad, were you ever
If
into
I was a what?
like a guy who draws when you were young? Like
Oh, a
into
drawer. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually was.
so you were
Um,
like into that when you were young, like
yeah, like a lot of the as we've sat here and done this series with all the like people in my age group, not just the New Yorkers, right? Because like we've interviewed enough Cali friends of mine that like I relate to their stories too because we were in the same age group. So like Lush and me are like a year apart. So like yeah, I absolutely drew. Tagging was like a thing. that I participated in, um, heavy. My tag was Sin with a C, CIN.
Mm.
Um, I would make the C flow into the I, bring the I down into the N, hit it with a fat circle at the top. Um, but yeah, I definitely did draw, and I tagged, and my parents were playing vinyl. My parents were playing a lot of vinyl back then. Actually, I remember my household growing up. Um, like I'm old enough that like I remember. I don't remember my parents playing music on it, but I remember seeing pictures of my parents' 8-track system, and it
Mm.
looked like one of those old '70s disco boombox. So it had like all those bright holographic disco sticker things, you know what I mean, on the inside and shit. And it played what are those small records called again? 45s. It played 45s, and at the bottom part of it, it had like an 8-track thing that you would put in, like an 8-track. Um, I just remember seeing that in a lot of pictures, like a lot of like, oh, you weren't born yet. Look at all these pictures of back like before you existed, and I'd be like, "What? How dare you guys have lived a life without me?"
That's hilarious. I feel like as a kid, though, you do have that moment of how dare you live a life before me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're selfish as a kid. You're like, what? You have a life outside of me? You
Mm.
you 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 do your own thing? No, you're my everything. Yeah, yeah, facts. So yeah, my parents, that's what they did. But like I was a tape kid. I was a tape kid, and I was born into the CD era. Like essentially before I even got into hip hop like that, like heavy, right? Where like they ask me like the typical question that I used to get asked of like, when did you fall in love with hip hop? Because every guy that like had like magazine or hip hop blog back in the days watched one too many, like watched Brown Sugar one too many times. And so like you'd always get asked that question. And so for me, it was always like, Biggie Ready to Die was when I really, really fell in love, right? But again, I was growing up in New York City around this shit. So like my babysitters who like my parents, they both worked at the time when I was like first born and really small up until like about 6 years old. My mom worked, and uh I would get left with my downstairs neighbors. Those were my babysitters, and they were very like very Puerto Rican, but like super Puerto Rican out, where like they weren't New York out. They weren't into, American stuff. But like through them, I got my first ever album. Like they gave me Salt and Pepper, Salt with a Very Necessary Pep, or whatever that album name was. And they gave me that album before I was even into hip hop like that. Like hip hop was there, it was in my everyday, and I loved it, right? But it wasn't like, oh, this matters so much to me. Like it didn't matter when we were in the car. My parents would play whether it was their music or they played like WBLS, which was like the pop radio station that would play all that like Gloria and Been Around the World type stuff, right? Like that stuff was fine by me. I loved all that stuff, like I said. So it's not like I was stressing it or like, like telling my parents like, oh man, I wish you guys would just play hip hop. I was fine with the music that was around me at the time. So like for them to give me a fucking hip hop CD, so like a CD, which was like way before people had. I don't even think Discmans were around back then when Salt and Pepper put out that album. Like CDs were just like I think at the cusp of like becoming a real thing. Tapes were still really important, and Walkmen were still like everybody's go-to method of listening to music, on transportation and shit like that. So
Mm.
yeah.